Y'all know I am a doubter when it comes to essential oils. I've told you before, but Simply Earth essential oils have made me a believer. Why? Well, it wasn't just me figuring this out. It was my wife and I. And what we've been using is the Simply Earth essential oil recipe box. Now, it's kind of like a meal subscription kit, except you can't really eat it. They send you 4 essential oils, pure essential oils, 6 recipe cards, and tons of extras. And you guys, we've begun to learn how to mix our own essential oils and making the recipes created by certified aroma therapists. And we're saving money and detoxifying our life. I'm telling you guys, this could be the thing that you finally step into when it comes to essential oils and says, I like this. This is what you guys need to do. You guys head over to simplyearth.com/humanhope. That's simplyearth.com/humanhope. And when you sign up for Simply Earth Essential Oils Recipe Box, you guys are going to get a free 80 milliliter diffuser when you subscribe at our URL, simplyearth.com/humanhope. What is good, Human Hope Familia? Welcome back to another episode of Human Hope. And I am so glad I said another episode because after 38 weeks in a row, that's right, last week I took a week off. And listen, I enjoyed my week off. I had my Thanksgiving turkey without wondering. I wonder if my podcast uploaded correctly. So after 38 episodes, it was nice to take a week off, but I'll be honest, I missed it. I missed hanging out with you guys. I missed you guys hearing from some of my friends. And today we've got another fascinating conversation from up north. And I'll clue you in on that in just a second. But for those of you around here, my name is Carlos Enrique Whittaker Guzman Cabello, or Los for short, and I'm the host of the Human Hope podcast, where I tried to bring some hope to humanity in various shapes or forms. This week, the conversation that we're going to be leaning into, this has been a long time coming. You know, my friend Carey Nieuwhof, I probably am recognized more from his podcast than any other podcast I've ever been on. He has one of the most successful leadership podcasts on Apple Music, on Spotify. You guys should definitely go check out Carey Nieuwhof's podcast. But when I went on his podcast, that's when I went deep, right? Like I told him the pits of despair in my life. I let him know what happened when I lost everything. Now, I've actually talked about that story here on the Human Hope podcast. I talked about losing absolutely everything. Episode 23, How Forgiveness Healed More Than Just My Marriage. That's a great episode if you guys want to go back and listen to that. I talked about there, and then I talked also about it on, I want to say it was episode 18, where I talked about how I lost my entire family because of bad decisions I made about a decade ago. Now, good news, spoiler alert, family's back. You guys follow us on Instagram. Everything is good, but it wasn't always that way. And Carey is somebody that I trusted enough to have the deepest conversation I've ever had on a podcast about it. He asked some really difficult questions, but they were questions that apparently a lot of people needed to hear because of that podcast, I've gained so many new friends because they heard my story on Carey's podcast. So all that to say, Carey is just a trustworthy person. I trust him with the deepest parts of my soul. He was, he is a pastor, but he was the founding pastor of a church up north of Toronto. And today we're going to lean into something that affects, I'd want to say something that affects almost everybody, and they just don't know that it does. You know, people talk about anxiety, people talk about depression, but what people don't talk about is burnout and how that's probably the leading cause of our anxiety and depression in 2021, in 2020, because we're going so hard. And Carey is so vulnerable with his story on burnout. We're gonna hop right in, and he's going to help a lot of us that are either burned out by the church, a lot of us that are deconstructing our faith. If you're deconstructing your faith, we talk about that. Even if you're not deconstructing your faith, what it looks like to maybe do church the wrong way, do church in a way that's unhealthy, that creates burnout, that creates moral failures, that creates all these things. We talk about that. We also talk about Canada. Listen, we give Canada a big segment here. We talk about Canada, and then he gives us just some tips and some tricks on how we can overcome burnout. This isn't just burnout of church leaders. This is burnout. You could be a stay-at-home mom, and there's a lot of stay-at-home moms that are experiencing burnout right now, and they just don't even know it, right? There's a lot of students right now that are experiencing burnout, and they don't even know it. This isn't just for a corporate executive, female or male, that's leading high-capacity leaders. No, we are all in a season of life where we can burn out if we're not careful, and I'm so grateful that Carrie hopped in the Human Hope podcast to help us not burn out. Amigos y amigas, sit back and enjoy this conversation with your new friend, Carrie Nieuwhof. So official. Okay, Human Hope amigos and amigas, I am here with my longtime friend, Carrie Nieuwhof. Carrie, say what's up to the Human Hope family.
Hey, what's up? Carlos, it's so good to be with you on your show. You've been on mine a few times, and it's just nice to... you got this big deal podcast. It's so fun.
I don't know about that. Yours is definitely a big deal. Let me tell you why. I need to tell everybody why I know Carrie's podcast is a big deal. Because whenever I go on Carrie's podcast, I could go on the Oprah Winfrey show and not sell as many books as when I go on Carrie's podcast. Carrie moves the needle. Okay, I just need to let you know, Carrie.
Dude. It's a tribe.
Dude,
I'll tell you, they're amazing.
They are all in, and it's still a month does not go by that I end up somewhere and someone's like, "Hey, I heard you on Carrie's podcast," and I'm like, "I just love it. I just love it, man."
And we're due for a new one because I think the last time it had to be pre-COVID because we were. Yeah. I'm near Oceanside right now, and I think we were in Oceanside or Vista or something like that. And I remember recording an episode in person with you.
Yep.
And so it had to be pre-COVID. But
it was. We are.
Yeah. So you're due.
But you are on my show right now. Like you are in my house. I am so grateful that you are here. Let's go somewhere that I want to go at the very beginning of this conversation. I need all of the Canada in you to tell me why Canada is so amazing. I love my Canadian friends, and bro, like you are the epitome of what a true Canadian is. Talk to me, bro. Like tell me about what's so amazing about Canada.
You know, we're an interesting group of people. I'll tell you that. First of all, we just saved the world with maple syrup. Did you hear that? Like, it's happened a couple times now. And I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. It's like, I'm always trying to get out of stereotypes. And then all of a sudden we're playing right into a stereotype. It's like, yes, we do have global reserves of maple syrup that we are now distributing to America because of the maple syrup crisis here. Yeah, so there's that. I don't know. It's really interesting. I think we have a reputation for being nice.
Yeah.
And people tell me that I'm nice. I'm like, well, I hope so. Do you really know me? I think we're a little bit, and we'll see how many Canadian listeners you have, because you may get some mail on this one or some comments.
Yeah. Okay, good.
I think we're passive aggressive. I think we're a little insecure. Okay. Our identity is defined on what we're not. So we're not British because, well, we didn't have a revolution like you guys did,
right?
But we're sort of connected to the crown, but not really. But we sort of are. And we're definitely not American because we're envious. Like you guys seem to do everything so big and so huge, and so we're not that. But then it's like, what are we? And so there's hockey, but I'm one of the 6 Canadians who doesn't play hockey or watch hockey. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now, if my sons are around, I'll watch hockey with them.
Yeah.
But I played when I was a kid, and it wasn't a lot of fun. So what do I love about my country? I love the people. I love the topography. I love the history. It is actually really an interesting country historically. I love living there. The people are great. So people often think I live in the U.S. Well, I'm in the U.S. right now because I'm here so often. But we really love going home, friends, family. I love the 4 seasons. Like we get 4 actual seasons, which is really nice. And it's very diverse. Like America is a whole bunch of little countries, right? Like New England is not SoCal, is not Atlanta, is not Nashville, is not Seattle. And Vancouver is not Calgary, is not Toronto, is not Montreal, is not Halifax, and yet there's something that knits that all together. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling.
I love it. No, this is perfect. Just because I think I actually do have a lot of Canadian listeners, and I think a lot of times when it comes to Canada, Americans, we don't even know what to think. Like, it's like, well, yes, it's a country, right? Yes. But are they proud to be Canadian? Like,
Canadians are very sensitive about that. Like, if you talk to an American and it's like, it's a classic thing. Like, oh yeah, Carrie, you're from Canada. I know this guy in Vancouver. Any chance you know him? Like, Canadians get very offended by that. But then because I thought about that for years, speaking in the US and leading in the US and that kind of thing, while leading a church in Canada and doing all my stuff, like my home base is still Canada. Yeah. But then I started saying to Canadians, okay, name the governor or prime minister of Ecuador. And they're like, yeah, no idea. What kind of government system does Ecuador have? It's like, no idea. How about Belgium? Can you do Belgium? Like, who's leading Belgium right now? It's like, what kind of parliamentary system do they have? They're like, and I'm like, so you can't necessarily blame, or they're like, yeah, but we're right next door. Okay, how about Mexico? Who's the president of Mexico? Right? And how does their legislature work? And they're like, we don't know. And I'm not sure I know the answer to any of those questions right now either. So it's almost, but because the US is so huge and was a global superpower, we kind of know who the president is. We know who the senators, the key senators and Congress people are. And as Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, famously said a generation ago, he said, when the elephant sneezes, the mouse catches a cold. And so we feel like the mouse and America is the elephant. And so we have to know about you. But Canadians can get upset if you don't know about us. But I would just say to Canadians listening, we have the same problem. Like, we don't know who's running Norway. Nobody. We know they have a lot of Teslas. That's about it. What else do we know? And I've been to Norway, right?
Yeah. No, I love it, man. That is so good. Yes. So to all my Canadian listeners, this is some Canadian love for you today, as Carrie is on here. What part of Canada does your big green egg reside in that I see you on Instagram constantly?
1 hour north of Toronto. So we live in a little tiny community I rarely talk about, because even people who live in Canada don't know where it is. But I live in Oro-Medonte. It's a township. We live just across the street from a gorgeous lake, Lake Simcoe, between Barrie and Orillia. It's about an hour straight shot north of Toronto. And we've lived there for over 25 years now.
Wow. As you've lived there for 25 years, Carrie, you... I guess as I've known you, I've even seen an evolution of kind of who you are and, continue to grow. And I'd love to tap into that a little bit later. But I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your time pastoring a church not a Canadian church, just a church in general, right? Like, I just want you to, because, and this is where I don't just want you to tell us a story about that. What I want is people know that people trust me with their, I don't know, maybe their faith stories. Like, people come to me with maybe some broken faith stories, and they know that I only bring to them people that I trust. And I really do. Like, I trust your heart. I trust your heart for people. I've seen you fight for the oppressed. I've seen you advocate for the brokenhearted. And so I need people to know that yes, Carrie's a pastor, but also, like, you're one of the pastors that I trust. I would send my friends that are like, you know what, I'm done with church. And I've got a lot of friends like that. I would send them to you, and I'd be like, you can trust this guy. You can trust this guy. So tell me a little bit about your past with the church, and maybe kind of your current place within the church.
Well, I appreciate that a lot, you saying that. Yeah, Canada in many ways is 20, 30, 40 years ahead / behind America. So, America, I think, is rapidly becoming post-Christian, which is why you hear so many deconstructing their faith, walking away from faith, all those stories that have populated the American landscape over the last decade. That happened in my childhood. I remember growing up in the 1970s and early 80s, and I have this very clear image of me. I'm probably 15 years old, so it's around like early 80s, and I'm standing on the steps of our porch, of the porch of the front steps of the church, I should say. And I have this sinking realization that I'm one of two kids in my high school who goes to church. And I don't know, that was the beginning of a call, because I didn't really think of going into ministry until halfway through law school. I felt I went on to be a lawyer, and then it was in law school I felt this call to ministry. But I feel like in many ways, number one, my call to ministry was totally out of the blue. So I was a kid, grew up in a Christian home, slid away from my faith, not fully. Like if I died in a car accident, I wanted to go to heaven, but like barely. It was insurance. That was it. It's like, I'm going to live the way I want to live, but like, God have mercy on my soul in case anything bad happens, because hell doesn't sound great. And so that was sort of my spirituality. And then in my early 20s, kind of went, okay, the jig's up. Like, I'm either going to follow Jesus or forget about it. I'm either like Nietzsche. I studied philosophy. So I'm either like an existentialist and there is nothing, or it's Jesus. And I started reading the Bible and praying. And I promised to do it for 6 months. And at the end of those 6 months, I'd make a decision. And didn't take 6 months. Started reading the Bible, and I'm like, this is the most true thing I've ever encountered. Rededicated my life to Christ, but no thought of ministry. So grew up in kind of an anemic, well, actually, I was part of a strong church. I had some really good preachers in my teen years that were very formative. And, but like an anemic church culture in Canada now. What you're starting to see in the US, that's what I grew up with in, the 80s and 90s. So long story short, it was in law school. I felt this, and I'm not charismatic. I have a Presbyterian background, but like supernatural call to ministry. And I know you believe in that. You've written about it. The whole supernatural side. And then started out in ministry, and it was like I came to 3 little churches north of Toronto, and they had been moribund for decades. So they were all 19th century churches that were hanging on, like they're golden. They didn't really even have a golden era. It was like that little stereotypical, think of a New England church that's got 25 people in their 70s coming on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And I got called there. And one of them had an average attendance of 6, another was 14. Oh my gosh. And the mega church had 23. So I do the circuit on Sunday morning. And it was like, okay, it's time to like reach out. And we started making a lot of changes. But who I met is people like your listeners. There were so many de-churched, unchurched people in Canada, in that area. And we lived like, my friends joke with me, it's like, how do you grow a church here? You guys have cows for neighbors. I'm like, yeah, but we baptized some of those bovine, like we did.
Let's go.
We don't have a lot of people. It was a rural county, but we saw the church grow, and we drew from cities nearby and eventually from Toronto and things like that. But, we grew to 700 or 800 and then morphed into Connexus, and now we're 1,500 pre-COVID, whatever we are today. But a lot of those are unchurched people, and they just have stories, and they got hurt by the church. They went to church and didn't understand. We heard that so many times from people who are like, I grew up in church, but I had no idea what any of this was about. Or they got a divorce, or they got pregnant early, or there was something that went on with their life where a bunch of Christians looked down their nose at them, and we became like a refuge for people like that. Plus atheists, who changed their mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. I've got, I do have a lot of atheists. I've got a lot of, again, people that are deconstructing their faith. And what I try to do is I see a lot of evangelical America just, freak out like, oh my gosh, like people are deconstructing their faith and holy crap, like, what's happening? And I try to tell people like, you know what? Like, I feel like we all do this. It's at some point in our lives. Like, I would hope that everybody is going to take what they've learned and put it to the test and, take it apart and put it back together. I tell people, even me as a faith leader, quote unquote, whatever you'd want to call me, like I've deconstructed it may have looked differently than how you're doing it. But a lot of times I feel like people are not necessarily deconstructing their faith. What people are doing is deconstructing the church and what the church is. So maybe Pastor Carey here, I'm going to put the Pastor Carey on you. Could you help somebody that maybe has had some church wounds as opposed to faith wounds, and maybe what the difference is between those two things? What did I say? Carey is coming hard. And before we hop back into the conversation with Carey, I do want to take a minute and talk about one of our show sponsors that you guys know I love. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. We talk a lot about BetterHelp on the show, and this month we're discussing some of the stigmas around mental health. Like, for example, some people think that you should wait until things are unbearable to go to therapy, but that's actually not the case. Therapy is a tool to utilize before things get worse. I tell you guys this all the time. This is like upkeep. It's like going to get your tune-up, and it can help you avoid those lows. And a lot of people, right, they think that therapy is for crazy people, so-called. But therapy doesn't have to mean that something's wrong with you. It means you recognize that all humans have emotions, and we need to learn to control them, not to avoid them. I love my BetterHelp therapist. I loved my therapist before BetterHelp. I use BetterHelp, and I believe it can be helpful for you too. It is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's way more affordable than in-person therapy, so you can be matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. Listen, give it a try and see why over 2 million people have used BetterHelp online therapy. And this podcast, since we're sponsored by BetterHelp, Human Hope listeners get 10% off their first month of BetterHelp. So go to betterhelp.com/humanhope. That's BETTERHELP.com/humanhope.
There are so many church wounds. And the first thing I would say is, I'm sorry. And I've probably inflicted my share over the years as well. And so I was thinking about that this morning. I went out for a 5K run, and I was listening to the rise and fall of Mars Hill. And, that's a very chilling saga that haunting. That journalism, it's haunting. Yeah. And I thought, I definitely hurt some people along the way too. And what, I'm just going to say this. I don't know whether it's helpful or not, but there are a lot of emotionally unhealthy Christians. And when you're an emotionally unhealthy leader, and am I emotionally healthy? I don't know. I think when you claim to be emotionally healthy, you probably have some things you need to deal with. But I would say I'm healthier now than I was. Yeah. And I'm certainly, the relationships closest to me are much healthier than they were in perhaps the first decade of leadership. But there's a lot of emotional unhealth in the church, in leadership, and also among people. And I think sometimes people, including church leaders, they're emotionally unhealthy, but they gravitate to the church and they claim to be spiritually mature. I'm just trying to think this out, and I want to say it well. I like this. Yeah. In other words, I'm really emotionally unhealthy. I'm not going to deal with that, but I'm going to claim that me and God are like this. And so there's a lot of hurt that comes out of that. I was reading through my inbox this morning and comments on my website, and so many people just talk about unhealthy cultures. And I was part of that. Like in my first decade of leadership, we had a rapidly growing church. For the Canadian context, it was rapidly growing. Yeah. And I had a toxic formula for growth in my head, which was, more people equals more hours, and that the ends justifies the means. So there were times we were growing faster than we were losing people, but we were losing people. And there was a season in my life, and that's why the rise and fall of Mars Hill is such a cautionary tale, where I'm like, well, that's just a natural body count, and it's all justified by the name of Jesus. And then, it wasn't quite that extreme, but deep down, you're like, hey, people come, people go, but more good is happening than bad. And then I went through a personal crash in 2006 that just about took me out. It was an emotional collapse, just too much physical exhaustion. By the grace of God, I didn't do anything stupid. I had a good counselor, great people around me. I slowly came back. And as I got healthier, I realized there doesn't have to be a body count. And we're not a cult. People can come, people can go. But when they go, how do we honor them? How do we bless them? How do we, when staff go, they don't have to be bad people. They can be great people who are called to something else. And I started to learn healthier rhythms. And I just wish the church would get the memo. I wish, Pete Scazzaro, I know you probably know Pete, like he's done amazing stuff with emotionally healthy discipleship. And I just wish we would get the memo. And I wish church leaders would get healthy because their family is paying a price. My wife paid a price. My kids paid a price. The people around me paid a price. And now my definition of success at this stage of life, as I've reconstructed my life over the last, decade and a half, is I want the people closest to me to have the best experience of me. Well, if that was true, Carlos, as a church leader, and I was able to lead in that mantra for about 10 years after I burned out, I think a lot less people would get hurt. And so healthy churches can be hard to find, but they're out there. And I would, and it's not necessarily that large churches are terrible churches. There's some really healthy large churches, and there's some horribly dysfunctional small churches.
Yeah.
But I just wish leaders would get the memo. And that's part of why I do what I do these days is I want to help leaders get healthy.
Yes. Yes. Well, you're really good at that. One last caveat off of the last thing that you just said. Okay. And I get this all the time. Someone's like, Carlos, how do I find a healthy church? How do I how do I do it? Like, is it just Russian roulette? Am I just, do I just close my eyes and open up the yellow pages? People are younger than 40. They don't know what the yellow pages are, but, and put my finger on a church. Like how do you find one?
Yeah, it's hard, very hard to do. What I would say is no church is going to be perfect because we're basically a bunch of people in need of redemption. All right. Yeah. I am a person in need of redemption. Hopefully the 60-year-old version of Carrie is a better version of Carrie than the mid-50-year-old version of Carrie. Yeah. Like I hope to continue to make progress. It's not like I don't hurt people anymore. I just hope I hurt a lot fewer people, a lot less hard than I did before. So there's that. I would say, you know what the temptation is here? Okay, so there's two temptations. One is I'm going to do my own spirituality. I'm going to do meism. So it's going to be me and my books and my Bible and my God. And the problem with that is the way I see it, and that's where the culture is. It's you do you, you do you. I am the person who's gotten myself into every bad situation in my entire life. Like I don't trust myself to be a spiritual guide for me. Okay. So I look to other people. And so I don't think self-directed spirituality is really going to lead you down the path that you hoped it would, because you keep bumping into you. Secondly, I think a lot of people are going to be tempted to do online Christianity exclusively. Right now, the numbers are in single digits, but it's like, well, I watch Christine Kane, or I listen to Mike Todd, or I, do the belonging.co online. So I do that. And that's good enough. Like, that's fine. The challenge with that is you're not actually in authentic community. You're not really, like maybe you're in an online group and that's okay. But if you're just consuming, the challenge with that is you've got to bump up against people that you don't like and who are not like you. And perhaps, hopefully in a great church, vote differently than you. So our line, we did online church for a while before the pandemic was, if you love our church online, and we had, viewers from around the world, it's like, great. But a C+ local experience is better than an A+ online experience. Wow. So can you find a church in your community? That's fine, where they actually know your name and you can be part of a small group and you can serve there and you can invite your friends there. And then use us to supplement if you want. But I think that's really where community is lived out. And we have this idyllic picture of the early church, but then, I've read 1 Corinthians. It didn't go so well. There were lots of issues. And basically, if you really look at the New Testament through the lens of a historic document, I believe it's inspired word of God, all that. But you look at it, it's like a whole bunch of Christians that don't know how to get along. And Paul's like, hey, you over there. No. And you can't do that either. Hey, whoa, stop, guys. What is going on? And thankfully, that became the New Testament. And that is the community that God used. There's an apocryphal story because it's so easy to be so cynical with humans and it's totally made up, but I think it makes a good point. Jesus goes back to heaven and the angels are gathering around and they're like, so what's the plan now? Like, you're resurrected. And he looks at his 11 disciples, because Judas is already gone, right? Looks at his 11 disciples and he's like, that's the plan. And they're like, okay, well, what's plan B? This is not going to go well. And Jesus' answer is, there is no plan B. Yeah. And that's a miracle of the church, right? Like I get included, messed up Carrie gets included. Carlos, you get included. So now, do I think that we should do the wounding that we've done, that we should be as toxic as we are? No. But the experiment is an experiment that's been going for 2,000 years. And God believes in the church, and he believes enough in it that it is his chosen broken vessel. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
the church is filled by imperfect people that are following a perfect God. And so, you will never find the perfect church. And if you do, the second you step into it, it becomes imperfect. And so, I just think I love how you said that. And, again, for my listeners that are listening, that are, again, trying, the whole idea of having to be in community with people that don't look like you, think like you, talk like you, vote like you, and yet doing that in a Christ-filled way, I just think is the way to do it, And so if you just do online church, I've got a lot of friends that do online church, and they're part of community groups, and that's the only way they can worship right now. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. But I definitely would say, if you can, get out there and just give it a shot. Go to a couple, figure out, make some friends. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and ultimately, I'm not a psychologist. So, I mean, some of your listeners are, and they'll correct me on this. But, I think when I am disappointed in the quality of a community, there's a certain part of me that it's like, I think I'm really disappointed in myself because I'm flawed and I'm socially awkward at times, and I let people down, and I'm not always the friend that I could be. And when I see that within other people, it reminds me of my own shortcomings. And yet that's also where, when you break bread with them and community happens, that's where transformation really starts.
So good.
I don't know.
It is. It's true. It's just a human thing. It's a human connection thing. It's what we need. And again, please hear me. And I've said this before on my podcast. If you are a part of an unhealthy, abusive church, leave. That's not what we're asking you to go to. But I promise you, there is a church around you somewhere that would lovingly and gladly take you in. So thank you.
Somewhere there's words. A humble leader and a simple community that will embrace you. And if you can find humility in the leadership, and you can find simplicity in the church, that's a really good thing. And I would agree, there are some terribly toxic environments. I was reading a long email I got from a guy who joined a ministry organization. He's 23 years old. He's been there for 2 years. They were demanding 100 hours a week, and whatever the boss said was fine, and dissent was from the enemy, blah, blah, blah. And he quit. And I'm like, wow, well, good for you. But there's a lot of toxic in the church. There's a lot of toxic in the world. So you want to avoid that. On the other hand, you're going to find an imperfect community and join it, because you will be part of the tapestry.
That's right. Part of the tapestry. Gosh, you keep saying things that make me go squirrel and somewhere else in my thought process. But what you just said about finding a humble leader with simplicity. Carrie, I feel like I just spent a year mentoring a group of pastors where, these pastors are pastoring in America, churches of 300,000, right? And so in an American context, some people wouldn't think that those are mega churches or whatever, but these guys are they just want to love their people well. They don't want to write books. They don't want to, have a, downloaded podcast, whatever. Their desire is just to pastor. And I looked at these guys at the end, and some of them were frustrated because their churches weren't growing. And I said, can I tell you, I feel like America is ready for you. You are the next, you are the version of pastor that every single person in my DMs is looking for. I'm going to send them to you because they don't want sexy and slick and all the things anymore. Would you agree that is shifting radically in people's desires and what they're looking for when it comes to a leader?
I think so. I've been privileged to interview Tim Keller a couple of times over the last few years, and Tim's one of my favorite leaders and has influenced me tremendously. And I remember we were in his office looking out over New York City, and I asked him, about the legacy of Redeemer. And he keeps going back and forth. I've heard him a couple times on this. He says, the nice thing is what New York needs is better than one church of 5,000. It needs 10 churches of 500. And then he goes, on the other hand, a church of 5,000 can do things that churches of 500 can't. We can impact the city in a different way. We can resource, we can pour into social services. And you can really see, and I don't want to read too much into them. It was two conversations, but like this tornness to large church versus small church. And I think the answer is we actually need both. We need a few large churches that are going to be able to have a kingdom impact, perhaps nationally or across a region, or to do things, hopefully good things, that small churches can't do. But America is a nation of small churches. Canada's a nation of small churches. And if we just say, well, you've got 86 people, you don't count, or you've got 382, or you have 700, you don't matter. You're right. We got to take that kind of, sometimes people call it pastor porn or whatever, but that kind of like, I got to get bigger. It's got to get, all this stuff. We got to drop that as the gold standard. And as we're learning through social, influence isn't all it's cracked up to be either, right? To have 100K following you on Instagram is not what you thought it was. It's not going to bring you what we thought it was going to bring you. And, humility and simplicity are great virtues. And I think younger millennials are looking for that. Gen Z, it would not shock me if they are really looking for that.
Wow. So good. So good. Thank you for that. You speak a lot about your own story of burning out. You speak a lot about maybe how you came out of that. There's listeners. This podcast isn't filled with church leaders. It's filled, it's filled with maybe church attenders, maybe non-church attenders, but with human beings that I would assume 2020 has brought them as close to, if not burnout, as any year 2021 as well. So let's maybe shift into that portion of the conversation. For people that are, first of all, maybe define what burnout is, and maybe tell us a little bit more in detail what your life looked like, because I feel like maybe your story is going to help people go, oh crap, maybe that's me.
Well, very perceptive. I think half the people who are burning out don't even know that they're burning out, because it's the definition that passes for life now.
Y'all know that I travel a ton, and people ask me a lot, how do you stay healthy? I try to eat right. I try to exercise, but Lord have mercy, and Lord knows I ain't got time to do that all the time. So I have partnered with Athletic Greens to see if they can help me stay healthy on the road. And let me tell you, it's been about a month, and they are doing it for me. Today's podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the health and wellness company that makes comprehensive daily nutrition absolutely easy. I'm so stressed as I travel. I try not to be. My schedule's crazy. I don't sleep as well. So AG1 by Athletic Greens is a category-leading superfood product that brings comprehensive and convenient daily nutrition to everybody. Keeping up with the research, knowing what to do, and taking a bunch of pills and capsules, it's really hard on the stomach and hard to keep up with. So what do we do? To help each one of us be our best, Athletic Greens brings us AG1. They simplify the path to better nutrition by giving you the one thing with all the best things. Now, one scoop of AG1 contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food source ingredients, including multivitamins, multiminerals, probiotics, greens, all that stuff that your mama's telling you got to be doing. This is it, guys. And this is what's going to happen. We're going to make it easy for you guys, okay? If you join and sign up for Athletic Greens and the AG1 product, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1 year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit athleticgreens.com/humanhope today. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/humanhope to take control of your health and give AG1 a try.
So, there's a couple of grades of burnout. I had a pretty severe form of burnout where after a decade of pedal to the metal, running hard, long hours, workaholism, 7 days a week, growing a church in Jesus' name, one day my body called a strike. And it shocked me because people had said for years, Carey, you're going to burn out. Like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. That's for weaklings. And then one day I just woke up. My passion was gone. My joy was gone. My energy was gone. I had brain fog. And like, you can ignore the precursors, but when you're really burned out, you're like, okay, my body just quit on me. And so that's what happened to me in 2006. But there's another form of burnout, because I've had the privilege of working with thousands of people on burnout over the last few years as I've tried to help people through it. I call it low-grade burnout. And my working definition of low-grade burnout is that the functions of life continue, but the joy of life is gone. Basically, you feel numb. You're like, yeah, I used to be excited about my marriage, and I'm getting up every day, and I'm taking the kids to soccer, and I'm making lunches, and I'm going to work, and I'm doing all the things. But like, I don't love any of it anymore. I just kind of feel flat. I feel numb. And when I share that definition, people, the light bulbs start to go on. And, signs you should look for. Your energy is low all the time. We all get tired at a certain point of a day, take a nap, you feel better. But like, you're just low energy all the time. Everybody and everything drains you. Your kids drain you. Your marriage drains you. There's always draining people, but when everything drains you, that's an issue. Your passion is fading. You're just not passionate about anything. You do feel numb, but when the emotions come, they're inappropriate. So you freak out. Like, your 10-year-old was supposed to take out the trash, doesn't take out the trash, and you're like, it's an issue, but it's a 3 out of 10, but you had a volcanic reaction to that. And on the other hand, you hear that somebody has cancer, and you're supposed to be sad, but you just kind of like, oh, okay. And so our emotions don't really work well. Sometimes self-medication. It's the third glass of wine. It's the fourth bourbon. It's drugs that you're taking that are not as prescribed. Another one is sleep and rest no longer refuel you. So sleep and rest are supposed to be cause and effect. You go to bed, get 8 hours sleep, you feel better the next day. When you're burning out, either low grade or full on burnout, what'll happen is you take 3 days off. Your 3-day weekend, okay? I took Friday off. You sleep, you have a nap, Monday hits, you're still comatose. So signs like that, you're probably burned out. And it's funny because it started in the 1970s. I did some research on this for my book, but as a medical term to describe the condition that doctors were going through. So doctors famously in their internships would be pulling 24-hour shifts, 7 days a week, very little sleep, improper nutrition, and then they couldn't hack it. It's like, I'm not a robot, right? And so they developed the term in the 1970s, burnout, to describe doctors. Then it kind of became a work term. And I think what's happened over the last decade is, no, it's a life condition now. You don't have to be a doctor, a lawyer, a stockbroker. You're just burning out because you're alive. And I think our technology has made it harder because you're always on. Notifications about every bad story in the world are coming at you 24 hours a day. And you're just like, you need some hope. And people just don't have it.
Yeah. So give us the hope. So somebody's listening to this going like, well, Carrie just checked off 7 things that are happening currently in my life right now. And thanks, Carrie. Now I don't have to go to the doctor to get diagnosed with burnout. You just did it. Help me get out of it. What do we need to, do we just go burn all the phones and move to monasteries? And what is it that we got to do?
It would help. That is one solution, probably a pretty radical one. But assuming you want to live in a city with other human beings, we probably need a better strategy. So I'm going to give you some advice that I can give in a couple of minutes, but I want you to understand this took 3 to 5 years to rebuild in real life for me. So hopefully this is a shortcut. But for me, it was a lot of good counseling. There were unhealthy patterns in my workaholism. I was a performance addict. So if you're a workaholic, why are you always at the office? Why does the laptop never close? What is it about you that insists that to be valuable, you have to keep working? Ask yourself those questions. So I had some counseling, and that also helped me become a healthier human and a better husband and a better dad and a better boss. So do the digging. It's painful. It's long, it's expensive, but it's much cheaper than a divorce, and it's much cheaper than being a not very nice human for the rest of your life. So I did that. And then the other thing, I think, when I tried to isolate this for the book, I said the problem is an unsustainable pace. because what most of us are living at, whether you're a stay-at-home parent or whether you work part-time or you hold down 3 jobs or you're a professional in an office, whatever you happen to be doing, most of us are running at an unsustainable pace. So people find themselves overcommitted, overworked, and overwhelmed. I'm just always overwhelmed. Every time I look at my phone, there's 10 new things. The kids have this. The neighbors want me to do X. My mom is asking me to do Y, right? We're just overwhelmed, overcommitted, overworked. And a lot of us falsely look to vacations, weekends, spas. Let's get to the ocean. Let's just make it to Christmas. Let's make it to spring break. Let's make it to summer holidays. Oh, we're going to get this idyllic cabin up in the mountains. We're going to be there for a month, which is great. Like, I'm a big fan of rest, but the problem is we've all done that. We know how to rest well. Sunday isn't your problem, right? Your problem is you take a month off at the ocean, up at a cabin in the mountains, and you come back Monday at 11 a.m. and it's like you got hit by the bus. So what is that? It was an unsustainable pace. And when your everyday life is an unsustainable pace and you don't have good boundaries, that's when you really start to struggle. So what I had to do, and this is what took the time, was to create a sustainable pace. Because I thought, if you're truly burned out, and some of your listeners will be truly burned out, you feel so bad. I was like, I'll do anything to get back to normal. And then I realized, wait a minute, normal got me hit by the truck. So I'm not going back to that normal. I got to find a new one. So I started through counseling, coaching. I hired coaches, leadership coaches, time management coaches. I read books. I did everything I could. It's like when the patient is sick, he or she will do whatever they need to get well. So I was doing that. And then after about 5 years, I'm like, okay, I figured out my new normal. And the moniker is this: live in a way today that will help you thrive tomorrow. So what do you need to do today to help you thrive tomorrow? So I knew I had this interview with you. I knew I had an interview before that. I have an interview after. I've got a bunch of work that I have to do in my company, et cetera, et cetera. So I said to Tony, my wife, last night, it's like, hey, let's go to bed at 9:30. I want to be really fresh for these conversations. Because if I had stayed up till midnight binging on Netflix, I'd be blowing off answers and moving quickly through it. It's 5 categories for me. It's spiritual margin. Think of it as margin. Margin is extra. Okay. And I'm at my most kind when I have the most margin. So I want spiritual margin. I'm a person of faith, my relationship with God to be good. Started that first thing this morning. I want emotional margin. We had a couple of dinners with friends, new friends in California over the weekend. And they were 4-hour dinners, man. Those are great. When you laugh so hard, you cry and nobody wants to go home. They were very life-giving. So we had a relational margin. Tony and I are in a healthy place in our marriage. We have emotional margin. Physical margin. So I went for a 5K run this morning because I know when I exercise, I feel better. And then financial margin. And that's not about like being rich. It's just there are people with who make $30,000 a year and have money in the bank, and people who make $300,000 a year and have debt up to their eyeballs. So you just want to have margin regardless of how much you have. If I have margin in those 5 categories, I do great. If I start to draw down on those, and then I start to really struggle. So another real solution that really helped me, and this is the feedback I'm getting from the people that I help with this material, is time management is one thing. Lots of good books out there. Energy management is another. Energy management, I want you to think about your day. So I'd be curious about your answer to this, Carlos. Yeah. Because I've known you for many, many years. But and I imagine at one point you were definitely an owl or a night owl, right? Night owl at one point? At one Are you point still a night owl?
I'm no longer a night owl.
Okay, so musician, that whole artist vibe probably leans.
When I went from when I was touring and I was writing music and I was, it was 3 a.m. I mean, that's when all the stuff was happening, and then I'd wake up at 11, and no longer is that the case. Not only because I'm just an old man now, but because I just realized, what, for me, when I'm up early in the morning, I probably get 5 times more done than I ever did at night. So, yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So, current Carlos, you're a morning person?
Yep. I'm a morning person.
Yep.
6
Same with me. 6 a.m. Yeah. I'll get up around 5:30, between 5 and 6, and I'll have an hour just private time, personal time, time with God. And then by 7 to 11, that's fantastic. And almost everybody knows, hey, you got hours in the day where you're kind of at your best. You're feeling sharp, you're alive, you're go get them. Some people it will be night. Some people, I guess the majority of people are actually afternoon, according to the research, the studies. They might be between 10 and 2 or 1 and 5 or something like that. For me, it's a morning person. And what I used to do, we have 24 equal hours in a day. Not all hours are created equal. They don't produce equally and they don't feel equal. And so think about this. I'll break this down a little bit. So you're best in the morning. Is there a time of day where you start to drag, where you're like, more caffeine, or like, let me get a nap or a run or something? What time?
Around now. Like right around like one I'm like, oh, thank God for Carrie, because he's got all the good words right now. Cause like I'd say around 1 o'clock, like 1 o'clock Central is like after lunch. And I'm like, oh man, like, am I even any good to planet Earth right now? So.
Right. And that's being human, man. That's being human. Yeah. And mine is 4 to 6 in the afternoon. I'm normally Eastern time in Toronto, but 4 to 6 in the afternoon, that's when I'm like, I have 3 brain cells left. Do not ask me any questions, because the answer is no. I'm grumpy, I'm tired, and I either need a nap, I need to exercise, or I need to caffeinate. One of the 3. Yeah. And we're all like that. So we think robotically. We think we are our laptop, that we will just run all day long on a power source. And we're not. We're humans. And so what I realized, divide your day into 3 zones: green, yellow, red. Green, you're at your best. You're like, ideas are flowing. You're in the flow. You've got, you're in a good mood. You're creative. You're thoughtful. Red zone being 1 o'clock for you, 4 o'clock for me. There's usually 1 or 2 of those hours. And then yellow is everything in between. So what I used to do, because I was a preacher for 20 years, most important thing I could do as a preacher, and you know this as a communicator and writer yourself, is produce great content. I have to produce a great sermon for the weekend. But I was the king of breakfast meetings. So I go to a breakfast meeting, and you know how they run. You meet at the restaurant at 7.